Good evening, my friends. We will get going. We will have some others join us as they find parking, negotiate traffic, deal with DC. But we're delighted that all of you are here. My name is Larry Goldman, the Executive Director of the Washington Theological Consortium. We're delighted to host these lectures each year, thanks to the Heritage Trust in honor of Dr. Taha Al Alwani, who is a living legend that we were so fortunate to have in this region and to know. We'll hear more about him in a moment, but first I would like to give thanks to our hosts here at the El Hibri Foundation. Been so gracious to have us back again this year, and I would like to invite Maggie Siddiqui, the Director of Communications from El Hibri, to bring greetings.
Well, welcome everyone. Good evening. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the El Hibri Foundation. We're so delighted to have you here. The foundation is a philanthropic organization that supports advancing American Muslim inclusion. We do that through grants and programs, advancing inclusion, building capacity, and organizing communities. Anyone doing work in those areas, we're happy to support that work through many different ways. Our grant cycle is opening next week, so for those of you interested in applying for grants, I invite you to check out our website. We also have space grants, that is like hosted events like this one. We're always happy to have any of you back again, so I hope this is the first of many of your visits. Farhan Latif, our president, had hoped to be here himself in person to welcome you all, and sadly he's out of town on a speaking engagement, so he asked me to pass along his greetings. Specifically, I know Dr. Sechedina and Dr. Madigan have both been people that whose works I have studied, and he had studied the works of Dr. Nyang, and so I know he had hoped to be here. But at any rate, we hope you will be back again, and thank you all for being here this evening.
Welcome on behalf of the consortium. We are a network of now 15 different theological schools and institutes and interfaith studies, including Muslim, Christian, and Jewish studies and studies of spirituality. We're delighted to have one of our board members here from the Institute for Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Studies in Baltimore, and Heather, we're delighted that you're here, and delighted to have our board chair here, Jack Fiegel, as well. So if you have any questions about us and our work, we work on collaborative work between these theological schools, and it covers everything you can imagine, from very traditional Orthodox evangelical schools to very, very progressive socially active schools to flagship Roman Catholic schools to historic Black Divinity schools. So we also have a new member in Eastern Christianity, a Byzantine Catholic seminary, joining us this July. So we try to work on unity and dialogue from within so that we can strengthen unity and dialogue without. And we are delighted to have partners in this work. We have 3 or 4 public events every year. Thanks to the number of public trustees we have on our board, they continue to say we need to reach out to the public. And so we do that sometimes in partnership with our other member schools and member organizations. We have 2 areas of study that you or some friends might be interested in if you want to do graduate level study utilizing faculty from our various schools. These are open to the public, either for auditing or for credit to earn a certificate of study. One is in Muslim Christian Studies and Dialogue, and the other arising area of interfaith concern and collaboration, ecology and theology. So these will be outside on the table for you to take or share as you wish. We will be having other guests join us, so just make some room as they come in. We're about, I think, 55% of our RSVP list, but we probably need to move forward with our program. These lectures are in honor of Dr. Taha Al Alwani, and we are very fortunate to have his grandson with us this evening, Ali Al Talib. And Ali has agreed to share some words from Dr. Taha.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm here on behalf of my mom. She wanted to come, Dr. Zainab Alwani, and she couldn't make it, so she asked me to come instead. And I'd just like to share a couple things with you. First is my grandfather reciting Surah Al-Fatiha, which is the opening of the Quran, and then some of his last words.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين.
So those of you who know my grandfather, that was his voice. Allah yarhamu. I'm just going to translate what he recited. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the merciful. All praise is due to Allah, Lord of the worlds, the beneficent, the merciful, master of the day of judgment. Thee do we serve, and thee do we beseech for help. Keep us on the right path, the path of those upon whom thou hast bestowed favors, not the path of those upon thy wrath is brought down, nor of those who go astray. And so this is something my grandfather wrote a few days before he passed, and this is a translation of it. It's titled, I Am Muslim. I sanctify justice, celebrate freedom, and honor humanity. While demonstrating gentleness with the weak, I remind the strong that there is always someone who is stronger than them. I advise the rich to fulfill the rights of the poor, while I remind the poor that the rich among them have been entrusted with God's wealth to fulfill the rights of the poor. I love goodness and gentleness and reject evil. I invite to piety and reject violence. I cling to the rope of guidance and uphold the truth. I love goodness and gentleness and reject evil. I fight lies and deceit and forbid corruption. I seek reconciliation to the extent possible. I yearn for peace and despise war. I love humility and strive for a good life. I stand in awe of death, yet I believe that this is a bridge I must cross, to cross from a fleeting life to one that is eternal. I desire the best ending and seek refuge in God from the contrary. I love heaven and detest hellfire. I seek security and hate instability. I abhor hatred. I am not profane, destructive, nor corrupt. My lineage extends to Adam and Eve, for Adam is my father and Eve is my mother. All of humanity are my sisters and brothers. I do not disdain, betray, or humiliate a single human being. Rather, I strive to guide human beings, light their path, and walk with them along the path to heaven. I seek to be a roadblock between them and falling into hellfire. I love the universe and belong to it. I love all my neighbors in the universe, including its trees, plants, rocks, animals, mountains, and rivers. God, most majestic, has created me from this earth. To this earth He will return me. To it and from this earth He will restore me once again. To this earth I belong, and for its cultivation I call. My desire is to elevate the truth. My goal is to spread peace and security in it. My means is to struggle with my own soul in order for peace to be realized and security to prevail. I invite to God, to whom is my ultimate return. Peace is my objective. Security is my desire. Terrorism is my enemy. Conflict is my adversary. Inner peace is my pursuit. Do you recognize me? Do you know on this earth anyone who parallels this description? I am Muslim. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ali. We're honored to have your father's presence through his voice and through your words. We have a phrase in the Christian community reciting someone, their name to say of blessed memory, and some traditions are stronger in this than others, but we certainly remember Dr. Taha Al Alwani. As a Christian, I will say of blessed memory for all of us, and there's probably a Muslim phrase that's similar to this as well, and perhaps someone will instruct us on this. I'm still very much a student. We are honored to have as one of our speakers this evening a professor and IIIT chair of George Mason University, and we're honored to have the executive director of the IIIT with us this evening, and he would like to bring some words of greeting, and it's very fitting given who our first speaker will be. So I now invite Dr. Abu Bakr Al-Shingeti from IIIT to bring some words.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. And good evening to everybody. And on behalf of IIIT, the International Institute of Islamic Thought, I would like to greet you all and thank the organizers of this event, the Washington Theological Consortium, and in honoring Sheikh Taha. It's indeed an honor, not just to his family and to the institution that he helped found, but to all scholars and scholarships. We just heard Ali recite for us his last words and share with us his beautiful recitation of the surah. Of the opening surah of the Quran, and this was not the first time I listened to him and to his last words, but every time it seems like the first time because of the depth of these words and the comprehensive message. It seems like he put into that brief statement the cream of his wisdom and experience as a scholar and as a practicing Muslim and as a human being. And indeed, as one listens to it, at least from my perspective, as someone who works for the institution, he helped found the vision of IIIT of reforming Islamic thought so that the Muslims would be again capable of contributing to human civilization the way they once did. That vision, I could see encompassed in this brief statement. But I'm very proud that this evening we are gathering again to reflect on his legacy. I am particularly proud that the consortium has chosen to invite the IIIT chair in Islamic Studies, Professor Sachedina, whom we have heard multiple times speaking about the reform of Islamic thought and the legacy of IIIT. And I'm very, very delighted to be able to come again and sit and listen to the scholars reflecting on the legacy of Sheikh Taha, and particularly to our Professor Abdulaziz Sachedina. Again, thank you very much for inviting me to share a few words, and enjoy the evening.
Now I'd like to invite Dr. Pim Valkenburg, Professor of Interreligious Dialogue at Catholic University, a wonderful colleague to have in the consortium, with great, marvelous specialists in the hermeneutics of interfaith dialogue, among many other topics of study and teaching. And Pim will introduce our first speaker.
Thank you very much, Larry. I'll be very brief because no one is here for me, especially. But let me say a few words on Dr. Taha Al Alwani. And you were wondering, Larry, what kind of the parallel would be in the Islamic world to the idea of blessed memory. And I was thinking one of the ways you could express that is with a phrase that I often saw in Turkey on tombstones, Ruhana Fatiha, pray Fatiha for his soul. And it kind of is of very great spiritual depth that we pray the Fatiha listening to his very voice. So that's something that I wanted to say in response. So my task is to introduce Dr. Abdulaziz Sachedina. You have already heard he is the IIIT chair at George Mason University. Larry asked me, do you know him? I said, well, we shook hands. I'm pretty sure about that, but we never really had a conversation. But of course, I know him through his works. And maybe this is one of the works that is not in the list that you have in your program. It is his contribution to the Cambridge Companion of the Quran, probably one of the books that many of the students, at least in my program and in Dan's program and in similar programs, will read. And the very last essay there is The Quran and Other Religions by Dr. Abdulaziz Sachedina. And I think that's a very great entrance way to many students, but probably also for us today, because I guess that some of what you have to say this evening will bear on that same topic. One other thing I want to say about the publications that I have read from Dr. Sachedina is that it's such a broad array, going to ethics, to contemporary issues, to law issues, and to issues about Quran and democracy. Of course, that's probably his most, at least for me, famous work. And then, of course, the relationship between Islam and other religions. So I'm excited to hear more from him. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this very important occasion in the organization, consortium of interfaith communities coming together to remember. And I think very appropriately Sheikh Jabir Al Alwani stands out, one of the fine scholars who argued about the different ways in which we, as the members of different communities, could come together in terms of our spiritual connections and our common destiny as human beings. I think today to speak about pluralism in the religious communities is not an easy thing to do. Many religious peoples reject the idea of pluralism because that somehow dilutes and compromises the claim on the truth. People have a claim on the truth, and the claim to the truth is always somehow singularly controlled by a particular group. And this happens to be the faith community in general. So in faith communities, there is hardly a discussion about pluralism, because it simply means to them a kind of a compromise to the monopoly over the truth of religion. But I think Taha Jabir Al Alwani introduced a very important idea, and I have been inspired by his work and even my own work. The Islamic roots of democratic pluralism is very much a kind of a continuation of his conversation with religious communities. I've heard him appear together in a panel in Georgetown University, in George Washington University in the old days. And it has been something that I've also learned from my Jewish colleague, Professor David Novak, who always says in a way that I am not only Jewish, but I am also learning the good things from Christianity. I'm also learning the good things from Islam. In other words, we are not living in exclusive circles, but we are living in concentric circles, whereby we have a common thing that we appreciate in each tradition in our own communities. And I think that what we find to be amazing is when you speak to the scholars in the academia, we are far more conducive to the idea of coexistence based on a common understanding of the faith. But common understanding of the faith is very much the work of hermeneutics provided by scholars. It is this that we learn from Dr. Taha Jabir Al Alwani, that he undertook one of the very important texts that he has provided us is the whole question of apostasy. How do we deal with people who disagree within the community? Should we behead them the way the law says? How exactly are we to negotiate our space with them? But my concern today is to share with you the pluralistic culture of tolerance and the sources and impediments for the future of interfaith relations. I'm not an idealist who believes that once we speak about coexistence, our communities will come together and live together in peace. I don't think that is going to happen in a long while, until and unless the minds of the people are changed completely. I don't see those resources that are there in our own understanding have been able to tell us that this is the way, if you follow it, you will be able to establish a more viable intercommunal relations in the world. You and I know quite well, whether we go to the different places in the Muslim world or we go to the Christian world, whether we go to Sudan, we go to Iraq, we go to Iran, any of these countries are trying to handle the situation of interfaith communities, because they all have religious minorities. They all have to deal with their national constitution that does not have provision to defend the rights of the minorities. How exactly are those constitutional rights going to be protected is a big issue in the Muslim world. Partly it is the legal dimension of the Islamic law is such whereby we have a difficulty of communicating the need for the tolerance on the basis of the rules and the regulations that are provided in the Islamic legal heritage. The legal heritage is very much geared towards dividing the communities in believing communities and non-believing communities. And that's not the way we are seeing the world emerging today. In a global society, people are trying to live together as communities of human groups who share something in common. They have differences. They don't want to give up their own identities, and yet there's a need for a common ground to be shared. So I really am reflecting upon the sources that I read, and I read classical Islamic sources, I read Jewish sources, I read Christian sources. So I'm able to somehow bring these sources to inform me, because I do know one thing for sure, that pluralism is not a modern issue. It has been there in the history. It's not only the moderns who are thinking of secularizing the traditions so that they can live together peacefully. Rather, all religious communities at different times had to work out mechanisms of accepting the others. So you do find that in Baghdad of 8th and 9th century, there were communities living. There were Jewish quarter in Baghdad. There was a Christian quarter in Baghdad. And all this I do read in the history. Even in Jerusalem, if you go today, you can still find those quarters, by the way. In the ancient cities, it is there. And you and I are wondering, how did they live together? If the modern politics are the ones that are dividing them, that are demanding from them something more than what they can, produce in terms of coexistence, what is happening today? What I find is that there's a complex body of wisdom in the different traditions. In Islam, I find that tradition has built upon by many generations. They're founded upon sacred scriptures. The Quran is telling us about it. The codified teachings are telling us about it. The commentaries that can be traced back to the Prophet Muhammad are telling us how exactly that conversation took place. The Prophet did not come in the vacuum of religions. There were other religions in Mecca. There were other religions in Medina. Therefore, there was a need to establish a kind of what we call working relationship with different groups. Yes, one group was going to dominate because of the collection of the humanity that was accepting that message. And therefore, there would be that problem there. And yet, the Quran is underlying for us a need for conversation between different traditions. Tell them that we have common Lord whom we worship. Tell them that we have a common goal for our people. And we need to have that common word that would unite us. In other words, the Quran comes quite openly in terms of relationship between different religious communities. What I find to be very important to keep in mind is that wisdom is available today in the classical sources of the Muslims. And those sources are telling us how exactly should we build that community. Now I must say that when the Muslim community was founded in the 7th century, there was this idea of how do we experience the sacred? Would the experience of the sacred divide us with other peoples? Or would it be something that would help the community to build a relationship with others? In other words, there was a very deep understanding of what the Quranic scholars would say, taqwa. But taqwa was a moral, spiritual awareness. That you would have that awareness in order for you to relate to the other people. Moral, spiritual awareness, spirituality, if it was vertical, morality was horizontal. You claimed your connection with God, but it also required you to relate to other human beings across. How would you do that? This was something that I find in the spiritual practices, in the rituals that Muslims established for the community. I also find quite interestingly theological teachings. I do not separate theology at the expense of ethics. I regard ethics to be theological ethics. Ethics that is based on religious understanding of how God has provided us means of establishing the relationship that we are talking about. Theological teachings in Islam are strictly speaking dealing with how to teach Muslim mind to be not only to become aware of the divine presence, but also to be aware of the presence of other human beings horizontally. What are they demanding from you? If they're the members of the community, what do they demand from you? If they're the members of the larger human community, what are their expectations from you? And this is what brings me to the ethical reflections. Ethical reflections are thoroughly religious-based. They are based on the understanding that God has provided me with enough information how I should relate to other human beings. If He did not do so, why would He create me with other human beings? Why can't He create me separate in an isolated area where I can live on my own? One of the goals of creation is to relate to other human beings. How am I going to do it if I'm totally unaware of my obligation to them? Does religion teach me to hate them because they don't happen to be part of your community? Or to disagree with them and to play them down? How exactly am I going to deal with? Reflections on ethical issues in the Quran are deeply ingrained in the sense of justice and fairness. This is what we hear Taha Jabal talking about. That yes, there is something that I'm learning, I'm being inspired. What exactly are the ethical reflections? They are the social practices of the community. When we move on, we find that in Islamic tradition, let's keep in mind that there's no single church holding the entire religious knowledge within its purview. We don't have a church. We don't have ecclesia that defines for us the limits and the boundaries of the faith. The limits and the boundaries of the creed. It doesn't do it. The absence of the church creates one problem though. And this is the realism that history presents us with. That there are gaps between professed belief and operative belief in historical circumstances. History is telling us that this is not what your religion is teaching you, is it? But you are behaving exactly the opposite of what your religion is teaching you. So we find the discrepancy between the ideal and the real situation. Now, the absence of the church creates the possibility of pluralistic interpretation of the tradition. Pluralism is built in the system itself. So today in the Muslim community, if somebody tells you that what I'm telling you about Islam is the only way to think about Islam, then he or she is totally mistaken. Because there are different ways of looking at Islamic sources. There are different ways of reading the Quran. There are different ways of reading the Sunnah. It's an inbuilt internal pluralism in Islam. Let me also be quite clear that even the scripture in the Quran itself is pluriform. It leads you to different hermeneutics. The more you read the Quran, the more as a religiously reflecting person, you find there are gems hidden. Sometimes it misses your vision, sometimes you get them. So these religious principles that the religious leaders are using at different times are very much inspired by the religious source like the Quran itself. The Quran itself is asking people to reflect, is inviting them to think about the issues. And therefore we find that three orientations emerge in the Quran. Three orientations of religious diversity. I'm talking about the Quran here. There could be an exclusivist dimension to religion, whereby I can say it's only me and my community that's part of this message. Exclusivist in the sense that there is only one way of understanding certain reality and interpreting the sacred that is dominant. So that reality and that sacred dominant, paradigm is available at one level, and that level becomes exclusive. It says this is the only way you will understand the oneness of divine, oneness of God. There's no compromise to be made. This is the only way you're going to understand it. But also the Quran presents inclusivist understanding. Many viable religious traditions are present in human history. Even when only one is the culmination of the others, and superior probably. And that could be the historical paradigm that you follow as a Muslim. You follow as a Christian, you follow as a Jewish person. In all of these, you have this historical dimension that is controlling the way you look at the tradition you belong to. But at the same time, you are not denying others that they might have their own tradition. This is what I call inclusivist vision. But there is also in the Quran, and I'll bring it to your attention, a pluralist vision. The truth is not exclusive possession of any one tradition or one community. And although we might say this is a modern inclination, whereby we want to dilute the claims of the religious truth, but it is actually embedded in the Quran, and we'll see how the Quran speaks about it. When you look at the Quranic vision of the community, human community, it strikes to us that the Quran is engaged in formulating religious political space for each community. Each community should have its own space. And therefore you find that throughout the history, you don't have a history of anti-Semitism in the Muslim communities, by the way, throughout the history. I challenge anybody. You can go in the history, look at any period in the history, including Ottoman Empire. I don't mean to say there was no discrimination, but there was no anti-Semitism. Never. Because it was impossible when you have a pluralist vision of the world. That nowhere, lakum dinukum waliyadin, to you your religion, to me my religion. How can you have your religion and I cannot have my religion? Okay, let's live together. In other words, there is already an idea that the world is going to operate at different levels, with different peoples, with different temperaments and different spiritual inclinations. Are we going to condemn people who are disagreeing with us in our own inclinations? Are we going to do that? And the Quran says no. There's a place where you can claim your own space. That's your space. But if you don't want to accept it, we have shown the path, as the Quran would say, we have shown the path. You can become this way, you can follow the path, or you can reject the path. It's up to you. You face the consequences. In other words, there is no adamant requirement that all of us should be spiritually genome in the same way. We should be cloned in the same way. Now, when you look at that situation, you come to a very different understanding about God-centered pluralism. Now, I'm talking about the Quran here, and I'm not making it up. I'm telling you, I've been asked by many, are you making it up? Are you, because modern liberal thinker, you are doing this? I said, no, I'm not doing that, okay? So I assure you, you can check in the Quran. Go home and check it in Surah number 5, verse number 48. Check it out. This is the translation I have carefully garnered from A.J. Arberry's most reliable translation. I don't use any Muslim translations, by the way. No. I use that Englishman's translation. A.J. Arberry is the only one who's reliable in translation. All others have played with the translation because you can introduce any ideas you want if you don't agree with what others are saying. Look at this. For every one of you, you religious communities, we have appointed a law and a way of conduct. So each community is, so to speak, autonomous in its way and its conduct. If God had willed, He would have made you one nation. There would be no differences. All the religious wars would be meaningless. He would have made you all one. He would have cloned you, to use biomedical language. He would have cloned you all spiritually equal. He didn't do it. But He did not do so. Why won't He do that? So that He may try you in what has come to you. So compete with one another in good works. That's the only way you can show something objectively, good works. Compete with one another in morality, so to speak. Unto God shall you return all together, and He will tell you about what you have been disputing. I have not played with the translation. I assure you 100%. لكل منكم شرعة ومنهاجا ولو شاء الله لجعلكم أمة واحدة. If God had willed, He would have made you one community, all of you. He didn't do it. He sent each one scriptures, law, their own rituals, their own belief system. Why did He do that? So that we stop condemning each other. What should we do then? That's where ethics comes, by the way. Compete with one another in doing good. فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ. Compete in doing good in the world. إِلَى اللَّهِ مَرْجِعُكُمْ جَمِيعًا. You will all return to God. And then He will inform you about the matters you are disputing with one another. You have no way of resolving your differences. Because everybody is sticking his gun saying, my way is correct way, your way is not correct. And the Quran says, that's not going to work. You need to war, you need to learn to coexist with each other. How would you do it? What's the common ground then? The common ground is what God has inspired you with. God has inspired you with good deeds. He has inspired you to do something good. Do that. Compete with one another in feeding the poor, in looking after the orphans, in stopping the wars, in stopping the destruction of the world. Don't try to kill one another, right? That's Quranic pluralism. I'm not overreading it, right? No. I need some assurance from you. Those of you who are Arabists, they can tell me if I'm torturing the Quran with my meanings. No, I'm not doing that. I'm not engaged in playing games with the Quran. I have no politics. I'm not standing for president of any community. No, I'm not. I'm least interested in the politics. So, if the Quranic model of pluralism or coexistence were to be enacted, what kind would it be? A theological or an ethical? That's my question. If theology is a source of ethics, well and good. My belief in God who creates me with some ideas of how should I live together with other human beings would be very helpful. But if theology tells me anybody who doesn't believe like you is damned to hellfire, then I don't need that theology. That theology cannot do anything. Therefore, it's very interesting, until now, it is my challenge, we have not been able to create a common theology of interfaith relations. Because the moment we do it, we have to sacrifice our claim, exclusive claim to the truth, which is theological. It is theological. That I believe in certain things and nobody else believes in those things. Therefore, I'm not going to compromise. The moment you say I'm not going to compromise, you are in conflict with religious environment in which your idea is not floating well. It's going to be rejected. The second question that comes up is, what is the role of religion then in the public square? John Rawls taught us that in order for any society to be successful in democracy, in democratic rights, in observing the rights of the people, we need overlapping consensus. If you bring comprehensive doctrines in the public space, you're going to hurt the public. The public will be fighting forever. But if you bring a common understanding of what do we need as public, what do we need to live a better life, then that would be, I think, forcing us to look at the ethical requirements of how do I relate with you. Let me be very clear here. I'm not using ethics in a very abstract way. I'm using ethics as a source of regulating interpersonal human relationships. How do I relate to you? If I claim you are my brother, what obligations do I have towards you? If I claim to be a fellow neighbor in your house, near your house. What am I supposed to do for you? And this takes me to the Christian area of love thy neighbor. Love thy neighbor is the foundation of Christian ethics. That's what Christianity is teaching. And that's what Islam is trying to say. Okay, if that's what you want to do, fastabaqul khairat. You better make a common cause in upholding the justice and fairness. If you remain unjust, if you remain indifferent to the injustices that are happening around you, then you are morally complacent. Moral complacency doesn't work with a good society. You cannot be indifferent. Today immigration is a big issue for our country. Oh, you and I can keep very quiet. Oh, it's none of my business. I'm not an immigrant. I'm a citizen here. I don't know. No, you better worry. Because there are immigrants whose rights will be violated. And if you don't stand up for those violated rights, then you're missing a point. You're missing a point of upholding justice at the ethical level. What I'm talking about here is interaction between normative tradition and practical decisions. If I'm going to make practical decisions, the Prophet was asked a very interesting question once in his life. أخبرنا عن الدين كله يا رسول الله. Tell me about religion, everything. It's a very authentic tradition, by the way. This is one of those sunnah things that he said quite clearly, الطاعة للخالق والشفقة للمخلوق. You obey God and be kind to everything that God has created. This is the teaching. This is the foundation. I'm talking about interaction between human beings. If it is not informed by kindness, how is it going to be informed? All right? In the absence of a common theology of interfaith relations, what are we left with? Culture of tolerance, depending upon the ethical sensitivity that God has provided us. Each one of us is equipped. In the Quran, there is quite a clear statement saying that on the day of judgment, you might say, I didn't believe in this and that. I didn't believe in you, oh God. But God will say, didn't you know that you were supposed to treat your neighbor fairly and justly? Weren't you supposed to do that? In other words, you are still morally responsible to me, even if you did not believe in me. So what? Okay, don't believe in me. There are thousands who don't believe in me. I don't care. But if you misbehave with the fellow human beings, I'm going to catch you. I will not let you go. That's the kind of the language the Quran is using. The no, you will not be spared in terms of your responsibility towards fellow human beings. So we come to the very important understanding. And I think this is a very tough question to answer. All the things that I'm talking about, the Quran and everything, you might say, oh, isn't that idealization of what Islam teaches? How about this ISIS people? How about this IS people? They're killing, recklessly. How are you going to explain that? Very good question. Very good question, brother. How are you going to, talk about terrorism then? Isn't terrorism inspired by Islamic thinking about jihad? Fighting, holy war, dying in the path of God? It's quite normal for you to ask me then, to probe me and say, well, wait a minute. We don't accept what you're telling us. Tell us about this record that we find. This is what you have done in history. Okay. But I'm going to touch upon a very sensitive, document that has inspired Muslim jurists for ages. Even now, when they read this, they say, oh my goodness, we need to be careful about it. This is a document that was offered by Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab. He was the second Caliph of the Muslims. And the document was offered to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. This is a very important document, by the way. Preserved in the historical sources. Any source you open, you find that issue there. Because the Christian priest had come and said, you need to guarantee something to us, because we are inhabitants of, Jerusalem. Are you going to treat us as a minority and take away our churches and, convert them to the mosque and this and that? He said, no. You are guaranteed your life. I'm reading the translation, very carefully done translation. I assure you, by the way. No, I haven't fooled with the translations at all. You are guaranteed your life. your goods and your churches, which will be neither occupied nor destroyed. See what a problem Egypt would go through today if they tried to do that, if they're bombing the churches or something happens in Pakistan or somewhere, there's always this big question, what happened to the instructions given by Caliph Omar? Because these are the instructions. As long as you do not initiate anything to endanger the well-being of the people. Don't we say that in America? As long as you are, don't engage in risking the state, you are tolerated in this part of the world. We will not. I still remember my, leftist graduate student at the University of Virginia who was constantly, checked by the FBI saying that he's a dangerous man, he's your student. Is he telling you something? No, I know he's not telling me anything. In other words, you have constant fear of those who might threaten the well-being of the state. You're talking about institutions. Institutions need to remain immune from chaos and continuous threat given by some of the citizens, right? And here then, you come to a very different understanding. The Quran is using the peoples of the book for the Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians. Maybe Sabians. I don't know who the Sabians were in those days, but they were in southern Iraq and that part of Iraq, and they used to worship stars. All of them are included as the peoples of the book. Interestingly, when Muslims conquered India, the new fatwa was issued that even the Hindus are the peoples of the book. In other words, they should also be tolerated and given the same kind of tolerance. I don't mean to say they were treated as equal citizens. I must be honest about it. They were treated as second-class citizens. There's no doubt about that. Even in Baghdad and even in Cairo and other places, wherever there were other communities, they were not treated as equal citizens. Citizenship in that meaning was absent. And yet, you find that Ahlul Kitab, the people are treated with autonomous existence, their own system, their own religious institutions, their own organizations, and nothing would be touched by the Muslims. But then we come to the legal documents. And I want to be very clear here that legal documents are dealing with the politics of the time. Legal life is very much the life that is experienced by the politicians and by the citizens. And therefore you find that there's a discrepancy sometimes. And you find that there is intolerance there. So that was based upon a very difficult understanding of the world. The world in the legal writings of the Muslims, in the Sharia, including Imam Shafi, all the big Imams, they all say the world is Darul Islam and Darul Harb. The world is the domination of Muslims, or there are non-Muslims who are dominating it. And therefore, potentially an area of war. Darul Harb. They were legal constructs. And there was a problem with the legal constructs because what they were feeding into was the political policies of the state. The state needed to understand when should they fight the non-Muslim powers that are threatening its boundaries. And they were required 2 or 3 times a year, they had to take the army and fight them. So I'm not trying to cover it up. I'm trying to open it up for you. That it's very important to keep in mind that politics creates difficulties for many of the religious ideals. And we find it to be true even today. Many times the politics, I have spoken to my Jewish colleagues who were sent by United Nations to build bridges of understanding between Jews, Christians, and Muslims, Palestinians in Jerusalem. We were there for 15 days in Pontifical Institute. We were housed in the Pontifical Institute and we were working with the religious communities. Of course, Palestinians refused to come. They said, we are being humiliated, we will not come and sit in this dialogue. Dialogue, everybody should be equal, but we are not treated equal. Therefore, we will not participate in that. Now, that kind of understanding on the part of the Palestinians was actually a blow to the goals of the very exercise that we were engaged in. They did not participate. So we were talking to the Christians and the Jews. Yes, sometimes the Sufi teachers would come, but Sufi teachers did not represent the majority of the Palestinians either. There were a small group of people who were, being told that this is the way it should be. Now, that kind of situation then, we are looking at a very different political realm and political practicalities and policy making, and we find there are a lot of problems. I want to make it clear that I'm aware of the historically problematic parts of the religious applications and religious laws application. I don't want to deny that. I don't want to whitewash them. I don't want to say this was a glorious period. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the reality of the situation. So then, where do we go to find a document that will work for you and me today? We are Jews, Muslims, and Christians living in North America. We want to establish a good community relationship between all of us. I'm talking about the practical application of what I want to present tonight as the last piece. My last piece is a documentation that comes, and my Jewish and Christian colleagues have asked me quite often, is this a private conversation? I said, no. It's a policy statement by the Caliph. And the Caliph provided a policy statement as a Caliph sending his governor to Egypt. You are my representative in Egypt. You are going to go there and you will find that you are in minority. You are the conquerors. Muslims were in minority when they came to Egypt. Large majority of Egypt were Christians. If Muslims had ruled, that we are not going to deal with the Christians because they are all they already lost their path, There's no salvation for them, there's nothing for them. Then the matter would have been resolved very clearly. There would have been, some kind of homicide and some kind of genocide and killing of the Christians would have solved the problem politically. But here's an instruction from the Caliph. And I want you to, again, I haven't paid with the translations, I assure you, okay? His governor is being sent to Egypt. Egypt is large majority Christian. Infuse your heart with mercy, love and kindness for your subjects. The governor is being told, this is how you will rule them. For they are of two kinds. Either they are your brethren in religion or your equal in creation. إما أخ لك في الدين وإما نظير لك في الخلق. This is Ali, the fourth caliph. He's sending instructions. And the instructions are written instructions to the governor. You better follow it to the word. You cannot treat them as inhuman because they've been created like you. They share with you the creation. Errors catch them unaware. Deficiencies overcome them. So grant them your pardon and your forgiveness to the same extent that you hope God will grant you His pardon and His forgiveness. Look at the instruction, the way this is a government policy. Muslims had a chance to rule. Sometimes they give extremely good examples. I don't mean to say all the time. They give good examples of the policies of the state. This is one of those statements, by the way, which United Nations recently I found has sent to the Arab governments around the world, saying that, have you forgotten this teaching of your Caliph Ali? You better follow this. By the way, this is, you can check on United Nations and the letter of Ali to Malik bin Ashtar, the instructions, and you can check out how many emails have been sent around the world. In other words, Muslims need to reawaken the very idea of equality in creation. Because one of the problems of the religious community is that they are self-righteously exclusionary. I don't want to share my salvation with anyone. I am the best, so to speak. And Muslims say, "Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat." You are the best community that has been brought forward, for humanity to guide them. But that's not what Jabir Al Alwani would interpret it. He said, because you are the best, you share the greatest responsibility. That's how he interpreted it. He said, no, you have a bigger burden to show that you are truly moderate community. Ummat and wasata. You are the moderate community. You show the example. You give the example what you carry in your life. I just want to draw my larger conclusion here. Where would this equality of creation be located? In theology or in the religious ethics? And this is what my conclusion is, that we have to bring in the religious ethics to teach us. But that's what the Quran is saying. فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. We are inspired with goodness and badness. And the ones who choose to be good are the ones who are saved. In other words, it's talking about the human creation. وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَاهَا. All of you have been created this way. And because you've been created this way, you have been inspired by religiously ordained responsibility. How are you going to live in the human community? Are you going to live in the human community with a sense of superiority? That you are superior to others? And that's not what God has created us for. And I think drawing the larger conclusion from this statement of the Quran is that it is not the superiority, inferiority. It is not me save you damned thing that is going to work, which is part of the... Have you seen the discussions by the John of Damascus about theology of the Saracens? Yes? It's worth reading, by the way. What kind of debate was taking place in Damascus in 8th, 9th century. And this is between John of Damascus and the Saracens, the Muslims. And what kind of issues they were bringing up, whether it was revelation, creation, or anything else. In other words, I want to say in my final statement here that we are in need of that understanding of equality in creation. If only we can master that, then we can live with each other with full respect and citizenship that you and I are looking for. There can be no racism, no gender discrimination, no race discrimination, and no faith discrimination tolerated when it comes to equality in creation. Thank you very much. Thank you.